as a writer, we're taught that we're in a very difficult enterprise. Chances of success are very small.
Wow.
It's communicated to you from the beginning. We were there for the challenge, right? We were there to see, do we have it? Do we have the chops? Do we have the discipline? Writing that first book is so much about developing your skills and that dedication, that muscle to be able to withstand a lot of revision, a lot of self-doubt. Self-doubt is like 99% of the experience.
My guest today is someone whose debut novel has won awards, hearts, and the approval of the Dalai Lama. Tsering Yangzom LAMA is the author of We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies. It's a novel about a Tibetan family forced into exile. It has won and been nominated for major awards and was translated into multiple languages. If you haven't read it yet, do so. We talk about her emotional writer's journey, the joy of writing by hand, the ego battles, the doubts, and how she balances being a celebrated author with her day job in environmental activism. She opens up about the pressure of the publishing world, the beauty of creative trance, and why she said no to prayer flags on her book cover. Also, find out what Iceland's got to do with Tibet and how black magic ended up in her next novel. Let's get started. Which book are you currently reading?
Well, I'm usually reading a few books at a time. So one book I'm reading right now is called Ducks. I picked this up at the local library.
Is it about ducks?
No, it's actually about the oil sands in Alberta. And so it's a very Canadian story. It's a story about a young Canadian who just graduated from college in the East and doesn't have money to pay off her student loans. So she goes and works in the oil sands, which is a very difficult place to work. And it's a graphic novel, so I really enjoy that. I'm reading a lot about Milarepa. So I'm reading like several books on Milarepa right now, including Halungpa, Lobsang Pil Halungpa's The Life of Milarepa. I've also been reading Haruka's. So there's several versions of The Life of Milarepa. So I've been reading different ones because I'm writing about Milarepa for my next book. And I just finished reading a really good book by a Yanomami shaman, an indigenous group in Brazil, in the Amazon. And this shaman, it's like, talks about their cosmology, their philosophy, and how they're fighting to protect their forest from various colonial and modern people who want to loot the land and destroy the peoples.
So you're the kind of person who reads several books at the same time?
Yeah, I think that's mostly because I find myself easily distracted. I think that's a pretty common situation.
Same here, unfortunately.
I like so many things, and then I just want to start one, and then I start another. I also abandon books pretty easily. I'm not...
When I start a book, I always feel compelled. I need to finish this book. I don't know what it is. It might be my upbringing. Say, if you start something, you got to finish it. I don't know what it is. I would never be able to do, because then I will not be finishing a single book at all.
Well, I don't finish many books. So this is all true. If you are somebody who values or thinks of finishing a book as a virtue, or like finishing something you start is a virtue, I agree with that. But that's not necessarily my main thing. Like for me, if I will give most books 50 pages, but then if the book starts to fall apart in some way for me, I just feel like life is short, you know?
What do you think are the most important things for you personally? What makes a good book? You said 50 pages. So what's going to happen? As in, do the characters have to be really compelling, or is the story more interesting, or what is it that makes you stick with a book?
Usually there's quite a few different things that I'm happy to hook onto any of those if it's happening, right? So one would be like if the book is giving me access to something that I just like genuinely want to understand, like the Yanomami shaman, and I know nothing about their philosophy and their way of being. I read that book in like 5 days because I was just soaking it in, and I wasn't concerned about the poetry of the language or, whatever, or the voice, even though the voice was powerful. So for some things, it's like I want to understand something. And then other things, it's like the pleasure of the language can be enough to carry me for a long time. Lots of novels where there's nothing happening, but it's just voice, atmosphere, some wonderful description of something that I didn't think somebody could phrase it that way. That's enough to carry me for 50 more pages.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the first thing you're describing is like a milieu being described. That I love it. It could be a movie, it could be a book, it could be somebody talking about a certain topic. I feel, wow, that person knows so much about this topic. It could be something I don't understand anything about. It could be something like, I don't know. I used to love watching Star Trek. As a kid. Obviously, I didn't understand what they were talking about, matter, antimatter, or whatever. But what mattered to me, so to speak, was, okay, they're really into it. I'm starting to learn something, and it was really compelling. So, but different question would be to you now. I haven't asked you where you were born. You are from Canada, right?
Yeah, so I moved to Canada just before my 12th birthday, but I was born in Nepal, in Kathmandu.
Okay, and then you moved to Canada and you've been staying there ever since, right?
No, I lived in Canada up until I graduated from undergraduate program, and then I was doing some work in Toronto, and then I moved to New York. So I was in New York for like a decade. And now I'm back in Canada, in Vancouver.
Oh, okay, unfortunately, I've never been to Nepal or Kathmandu. My mother always says, yeah, Kathmandu is a place I need to go to, but I haven't come around to it. Yeah, maybe some other time, I don't know. I'll be going to Dharamsala this year, I think, and I'll try and have a detour, maybe to Darjeeling. But that's a different topic. Okay, I'm getting off topic.
Yeah, there's so much to India is massive. There's so much to explore. Yeah.
As a European, just sometimes we forget what the dimensions are. India. I mean, also America, I guess. Different time zones. And I mean, I live in Germany, and everything's just really close by, relatively speaking. Would you consider yourself first and foremost an author? Is that a correct description?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess I'm a published author. So I think sometimes people use the word author versus writer. Whereas like author sounds more official, like a professional thing. I don't know. But I think there's a lot of emphasis on, I'm joking around a little bit because there's so much emphasis on identity and there's so much emphasis on clearly stating who you are and asserting that in our day and age. And whether that's your ethnic background or racial background, whether you're a racialized person or your profession, what you do as you move around the world. The writer-author thing is very interesting because there is a certain amount of a romanticization of these identities. And the reality is like writing is not a particularly romantic experience. Sometimes it can be where you feel like you're connected with some greater force and some greater mystery that you're lucky enough to access through the arts. But a lot of the times it's like, oh, you're a writer if you're writing, you're an author if you've authored, and when you're not doing that and you're just at a party, you're just a person.
It's much more interesting to meet somebody, at a party and you just talk about it and maybe have a great 20, 30 minutes and talk about this and that. And afterwards, you might not even know where a person is from or what that person does. I don't necessarily find it important to ask somebody, what is your profession? And derive from that some kind of, I don't know, image. It could be good, could be bad or anything. So you just jump from topic to topic and then you get to know the person maybe behind the shell we're all wearing in public, right? What's your take on discipline? Would you consider yourself a disciplined person?
I try to be disciplined. I think it's very important because I'm such a distractible person and because society is there's so much that can take your attention away from writing. And writing is a very slow process with very little instant gratification. And that's not what life is built for right now, it feels like. So there's so many things that I could be doing instead, like just watching YouTube or I don't know what. And I do that too, but I have to be pretty disciplined with my schedule. And that means my priority after I do all the basic things of like paying my bills and all of that is writing. Writing comes very high on my list of what I do, what I make important every day when I wake up. I try to prioritize writing. Sometimes I can go a bit overboard. I think discipline also needs to be, checked. Because we're just human and I'm trying to rest more. I've had a really long 3 years of book publishing and a lot of promotion. But the writing thing is very different from promotion. Like talking about yourself is like literally the opposite thing of writing.
Is it fun though? Talking about yourself and about your work?
It's fun to talk to people. Like it's fun to meet like different people around the world who are passionate about books and want to talk about whatever it is that they want to talk about with my book. And that's kind of something that I never expected and never really believed would happen because as a writer, at least in the program that I went to at Columbia, we're taught that we're in a very difficult enterprise. Like day one, chances of success are very small.
Boom.
It's communicated to you from the beginning. And the funny thing is, like, even though, it was communicated to us that most of us will not, or chances of success are very small anyways. But we all knew coming into Colombia, or I think a lot of us knew that it was already going to be very difficult. So we were there for the challenge, right? We were there to see, do we have it? Do we have the chops? Can we do this work? Do we have the discipline? Do we have the innate sensitivity to do this work? And then writing that first book is so much about developing your skills and that dedication, that muscle, to be able to withstand a lot of revision, a lot of self-doubt. Self-doubt is like 99% of the experience. And so something else has to keep you going, which probably is a little bit of progress you see in your craft. Like you see like, oh, I can now do this that I couldn't do before. Or this is starting to go to the place that I want. And so that's like craft, that's effort, that's discipline, that's willpower. But then I think after you've put in all of that effort, there has to be something that's also easy. There has to be something natural about writing. And I think that comes from, for me, forgetting myself, trying to leave my shell, like you mentioned, the shell that each of us lives inside, trying to leave it in a sense of like, get away from my ego to a deeper place or a different place within me that gives me access to creative freedom, because my ego or like my sort of conscious craft or discipline or rational or analytical mind when I'm writing will be very destructive in the early process of creativity, because it will say, this sucks, you're bad. You know what I'm saying?
This is
like
a stupid idea.
Yeah. Like this is failing. But then, so if you don't have that unconscious, pure, like almost just like getting outside of yourself, that to help you through that process, it can be very difficult.
When you're talking about discipline and hard work, I remembered reading an interview with ABBA, the music group ABBA from Sweden, and they used to be huge, right? And they were asked, look, how do you come up with all these hit songs? Because they had like, I don't know how many hit songs they had, like 20, 30, I don't know, and sold millions of records. And their very simple answer was, well, we go into the studio at 8 o'clock in the morning and we leave at 4 in the afternoon, and in between we just work and then we leave. And then next day we do the same thing. And of course, I mean, being a musician, wow, going on tour, it must be a great life. But for them, 99% of the time, they were in the studio and working hard. And this is, I think, something which is being underappreciated more and more. So I unfortunately share that thought with you. I love social media. I love using my mobile phone, I'm going to lie. But I know it can be a huge distraction and keep me away from the things I really want to do. So how easy is it for you to say no to people?
I think I'm getting better at it. It's not something that comes naturally. And I think there's something about this with our culture, with like as Tibetans. Or maybe it's because I'm a woman. I don't know. There's a very sort of a desire to be helpful, a desire to, think about relationships and put people and relationships first, right? So often when somebody asks for something and thinking about the person and like, how can I accommodate and how can I make it work? But I think it's very necessary. Like whether it's Instagram or the world asking you for things all the time, most people that I sort of think about, they really protect their time. And time is the most important thing for me, because I have so many demands on my time. I work in the environmental movement, and I'm a writer, and I have people that I want to be there for, friends and family. So I have to say no to a lot of things, and more actually. So it's getting easier as I do it more.
You're mentioning you work in the environmental sector as well. How do you combine you being an author and working a second job, pretty much? I mean, second job as in another job as well at the same time. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is pretty normal. Most writers I know, I would say like the vast majority of writers I know have to make a living either through teaching, editing, or working a job in the nonprofit sector. There are many of us in the nonprofit sector who are writers. Even people who have published internationally have to work. I think it's very, very unusual, unless you're like Stephen King or like, Sally Rooney or something. So I've always had a job, and even in college, I had multiple jobs. I think that's been just part of my life. And how do I balance that? So I just think about trying to preserve some energy at the end of the day after I've done my day job to write. And so that a lot of that is very subtle, It's like if I think about my book at the beginning of the day, it's sitting in my head all day. And to write a book, you have to hold a whole book in your head. You have to hold the book inside of your head. And then you have to turn it sometimes. So sometimes I'm turning the book in my head and thinking, okay, what if I shape it like this? What if I enter this way and exit that way? So I'm sort of, and a lot of that is happening unconsciously outside of my immediate conscious will or desire to work on the book. So
is it like a sculpture that you know that there's going to be a sculpture? You don't know 100% what it's going to be look like, what's going to look like, but you somehow do know what it's going to look like. Yeah.
Somewhere in my unconscious, I probably already have the entire book, but I don't have access to it. And that's what it feels like when you finish a book. Like, this was always here and I didn't know it. Or like these people always existed and I couldn't see them. And it took me this long to finally see and hear them, or to see what was already there on day one. There's that idea of the chestnut contains the oak tree, like the sentence contains the book, and the book is in the sentence, and so forth. But there's something about writing where you have to work with the mystery of what you're doing, and you have to be comfortable with that mystery of not knowing, and you don't even know if the sculpture that you're building is going to hold its shape, or if it's just going to break under its weight, or break under it's too big, it's too unwieldy, there's too many things happening. Most novels are messy. There's something messy about a lot of novels because it has to somehow approximate life, in the sense of life is messy, life is hard to contain, hard to understand. So it has to have these moments where you're just like, what was that? Or I didn't see it that way, or this character brought in something new that this other character wasn't showing. So there has to be some sort of destabilizing quality, I think, in a novel that suggests that it isn't one consistent, solid perspective throughout. Even if it is, something has to challenge it. And that's the source of the tension and the interest of a novel, whether it's on an idea level or whether it's on a plot level. You were hanging out with this one character. He seemed like a good guy. And then you realize, actually, there's all these problems, And so then that's where the novel goes. And so that's the tension of a novel or tension of a book. But then you also want it to make sense, because life doesn't often make sense. So a novel gives you an approximation of a narrative that feels like, that's why XYZ happened, or that's why people turn out the way they do. Two sisters, one goes this way, one goes that way. Why do fates unfurl the way they do? And a novel sometimes tries to attempt to answer that. Or a novel says, this is the nature of love, or this is the nature of ambition, unchecked ambition. It has a moral. And that's not necessarily life, right? So this novel thing is an artifice. It's a creation, it's a construct, but it gives us access into something that is very lifelike and ineffable, I guess, which is the interiority, the experience of being alive. Like a novel can give you an entry into somebody's mind and say, this is what it feels like to be alive as this person. Their memories, their body, their families, their obsessions, their, neuroticism, whatever it is. And so it's a very interesting thing to play with. And then in my day-to-day work, I'm writing about freaking climate collapse and ecological breakdown and the corporations that are charging us towards this this fate. And so I think it actually feels very separate. But then sometimes it feels the same, because a lot of the same themes come up in my writing as in my work. Like land. Land is very important in my writing. My first book was about land and the importance of land for Tibetans, which cannot be solved by any other way except to revere and worship the land and to treat it well, which is basically what ecology is all about.
When did you start writing? Or when did you know you were going to write something?
I think I always knew. Sounds kind of weird to say.
The moment you were born, I'm going to be a writer.
No, I did not quite that early, but I've always been good at language. I've always been pretty good at moving through different languages, which I think a lot of Tibetans are. We naturally, or we have to be, I guess. We have no choice. And so there's something about the power of words, the importance of being able to communicate and to make a world with your words, a world that you invite people into, and a world that you enter in, a way to access into other people's worlds. So writing felt very powerful to me from the beginning because of how vital storytelling is, I think, for us as Tibetans. It just, and I also loved to read as a kid. But I think the first short story I published was in college. And that was after I did a double major. I did creative writing as well as international relations. And in that space, the creative writing, it was just so much more fun, So I was taking these like political science and economics, macroeconomics, war law, all of these international relations classes. All of my classmates were going to go work for the UN and stuff like that. In those classes, I was often just reading novels and reading my classmates' short stories. Like I wasn't terribly interested in working at the UN at all, but I didn't know that I wanted to be a writer. I just knew that I loved writing and reading. And then after I went and I worked for Students for Free Tibet. I was the Canadian director. And during that time, I missed writing so much that I took an evening class, like a night class at the University of Toronto's continuing studies program for adults. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, I really cannot be happy if I'm not doing writing in some fashion. I have to figure out a way to do this. So then I applied for the master's program at Columbia in writing. And after that, even when I went to the writing program at Columbia, when I got admitted, I told myself, well, I'm gonna invest 2 years into this and see what happens. I think this is very helpful. Maybe you have to trick yourself and not tell yourself you're going to be a writer. Because I feel like if you say, I'm going to be a writer, that's a very difficult thing. You know what I'm saying? I never said that to myself. I said to myself, I'm going to give myself 2 years to learn this craft. I've published a few short stories. Let me see if I really have it, and see if I can really do this. And then even when I went into the program at Columbia, even then I didn't fully commit. I was like, okay, let me see if I can finish this novel. I think the idea of what you're going to do and who you're going to be is one thing. I don't worry about that. I just do what I do. And then see what happens.
I mean, super impressive. You were already in a job, and then to say, look, this is not something I'm 100% passionate about. Or maybe there's something else which I'm even more passionate about. Right? And to say, I'm going to try this, and I'm going to give myself 2 years. I think that's a very rational way of heading to something where you yourself said, writing 101 says, well, 99% of you are not going to make it. And you have to try and keep yourself motivated. So, I mean, that must have been tough. And so you've published your first short stories. What happened next?
Well, I published a couple of short stories and I published a play and I put on some stuff in undergraduate. And so I felt excited and I went to Columbia and I started writing right away, obviously. And in the program at Columbia, you put out a lot of short stories. This is sort of the model in North America in master's programs for creative writing, because a short story, 15 to 20 pages, that's about as much as you can really, write in a few weeks and get feedback on in a 2-hour class, that sort of thing. So it's a good size. So I hadn't written anything long like a novel, but one of my mentors, a professor, told me that I should write a novel. So I was like, okay, let me see if I can write a novel. Because there's a very big difference between a short story and a novel, just in terms of the years, but also just the skills and the form and the history and the precursors that you study.
The research, I guess, all the background needs, yeah.
And the potential. I can say that when I was writing my first novel, the main question I had was, is it even possible to finish this? Because I couldn't really tell for sure. And I had been working on it for so many years. But the good thing is that all of my friends from the program were all struggling the same way. Like we all took about the same amount of time. Some of them are still working on their books. Some of them are coming out with their second books. But there's a camaraderie. I think that's very important if you're wanting to be a practicing artist. Be friends with other artists. They're not your competition. In fact, if somebody succeeds, that can be very good for you. Celebrate their success. Stay in touch, When my book was coming out, other writers I knew whose books had already come out, I didn't even have to ask them for support. They came to me and said, let me support your book. Let me blurb it. I just think that if you're a writer, do not compete with other writers, is my main message. What
role does the book title play? Well, your book has been very successful, and we'll get into that later on. What do you think is more important? The illustration, the cover, the support by other people? What do you think?
I don't think it's purely luck. I think luck has a big role to play because you never know what book is going to connect with readers and what book isn't. But in terms of the book cover and the title, The title was purely my decision, and my editors, I was very lucky. They supported it. I had a different title, and then, they were like, I was like, I want to change it. And they're like, great, go for it. And then I suggested a title. They said, fine. And so I had a very supportive situation with my publishers in Canada and the US, and I had a lot of input in the covers as well. In my other sort of publication experiences in Europe, like in France, Poland, Italy, so forth, the publisher chose new titles. They would ask me, is it okay? But they have to think about their language and they have to think about their market and what people respond to in their space. So, I said, okay, that sounds fine, or I will input a little bit. But covers, covers are funny because I think that there are certain trends with covers, at least in North America, like certain things you see over and over. I was very direct about saying I didn't want certain sort of cliche things on my cover, especially things that people associate with Tibetans or Tibetan books. Like I didn't want a bunch of prayer flags and monks, like this, that the book doesn't barely have any monks, so.
It's great that you were able to have such strong influence on it, because I can imagine when marketing comes in, they will say, look, now this book is about Tibet, let's have some yaks on it, let's have the Dalai Lama on top of it, and so forth. But sometimes I do know, just looking at the cover, okay, this is that kind of book. And I have to admit, I don't know if it's a good or bad thing. I sometimes do not buy a book because of the cover, but sometimes I do buy a book because of the cover. So I was just wondering, actually, to myself, what your book is called in German. I didn't look that up.
The book has not been translated into German, so there is no title in German.
We're talking about the book We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies, which obviously put you on the map for the more general audience. How would you say has your life changed after that, for the better or worse?
Well, for the better, I feel that a lot of this has been internal, I would say. A lot of the change has been internal. Externally, yes, there have been certain opportunities to travel around the world, speak to different readers, be in interviews and meet other writers and visit bookstores and like small towns in France, just all these things that I just never would have even pictured, which has been just really wonderful and actually beyond what I hoped for. The sort of interactions I've been able to have and the experiences I've been able to have. But internally, I think, I have to shift my mind from being just a person trying to write a book to like now some people want to hear what I have to say. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like that's and it's not like me just talking as a Students for Free Tibet representative. It's me talking as myself, which is a very different thing from representing a movement or representing a struggle. And it's, I guess in a sense, it's much more exposing, self-exposing, which I'm not terribly comfortable with. And I didn't anticipate the level of like what I would feel was like I'm so exposed. But this is a small thing, because the much bigger thing has been how grateful I feel that I have this practice, that I have this thing that I do, writing. And I'm back inside of it right now for this next book. So I just feel so grateful. Publishing this book and having the success that it's had has allowed me to continue to write to this next book and given me support from all kinds of institutions and human beings who have said, we're behind you, keep going, write another one, and that's been really amazing.
And was it actually difficult to find the publisher for your first book?
It wasn't difficult. So I signed with a literary agent. This is a very typical thing in the US, where a writer needs to have an agent and the agent takes a cut, but the agent is the one who goes to the publishers. And so my agent came up with a strategy. She went to the publishers and I talked to different editors that were interested, and we ended up with the editors that we did. And then I have a foreign rights agent, somebody who works on foreign deals, meaning not North America. And they continue to work on getting me foreign deals for the book. And that they, so essentially it's nice. I have a team of people. They're not like my team. They're not like always working for me. But when I have something, they're working for me. And so I don't have to worry about selling the book. I just write the book and make it the best I can. And then they figure out how to sell it and if it's sellable.
How do Tibetans actually react to you when you tell them you're a published author, you wrote this book and it's really successful? Do they pitch ideas to you, or are they, what's their reaction?
I think a lot of Tibetans are like, I mean, I've met a few Tibetans who want to write books themselves. And I think that, this kind of information about how it works, how the publishing industry works, that's information that is like not necessarily out there unless you really pursue this. So I think there's always more questions. They want to know more, like how does it work and all of that stuff. But if you look online enough, you can find how to write a letter to an editor, like here's the sample letter, how to describe your book in a way that like makes it sound like it's going to sell. All of these resources are online now, which is really nice. I think there's a lot of interest and curiosity. And then some Tibetans are in the filmmaking industry, which I think is getting bigger and bigger in our community. So those folks are always looking for stories, is what I've noticed. Like if you're a filmmaker, if you're an actor or you're a director or lighting guy, you need stories, right? So, they're kind of like looking at me like being like, can you write a script? And I'm like, well, that's, I don't do that. Like I'm not good at that, but I think there's a need and a hunger for Tibetan stories, even from other artists in our community is what I mean.
So do you think AI, artificial intelligence, is a blessing or a blessing in disguise, or just simply bad, speaking as an author? Because you said there's so many things you could look up online, right? And you could actually just ask ChatGPT and say, well, write a draft for an editor when I want to publish my book.
You could do that. I've never tried. I've never tried ChatGPT, and so I don't really know. But I know that lots of people use it, including Tibetans, and I don't think we could really stop the AI situation from progressing. But I do think that AI is not creative. It's something. It's definitely something. It's very powerful. It amalgamates human output and, organizes it, I suppose, or synthesizes it. But it's not inherently creative like human beings are. So it cannot create something new, or it cannot create something to the level of like what artists can do, I think, in that it's not able to do original work. But that's just me, right? I don't know. And I don't know where AI is going. It seems like we're just at the beginning of this like wild time technologically. But, I'm like really old fashioned. I write with a pen in a notebook.
I saw that, by the way. I saw that. I was going to ask you. I saw all these handwritten notes on your Instagram, and I thought, she's doing everything handwritten. So all your books, all your scripts, and everything is done handwritten.
Well, yeah, as much as possible, I write the first draft, at least the first big portion of it by hand. So for this new book, I've been writing by hand. I just find I like writing by hand. I enjoy writing. I just enjoy the process. But I also think that it's less distracting, honestly. It just gets me off the computer.
Do you have like a favorite pen or something?
Yeah, actually. It's called a LAMA. This is a brand.
Yeah, they're from Germany. Yeah. They're actually from Germany.
Yeah. Yes, these are great. I love these. And then what I do is I get the extra fine nib, and then I get the converter. This is like an extra thing you could buy so that it's not just a cartridge. You get the refillable ink. And I like writing with purple ink because it's pretty. And that's it.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
When I was small, I remember my father buying a pen which was using ink, and he actually bought it because he wanted to write in Tibetan. And he bought this specific pen because it had this flat tip. And he said, that's the perfect shape for a pen to write something in Tibetan. And I don't write anything in Tibetan, so I was just, okay, it's interesting that you do that. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, I jumped to pens and things like that. And we were talking about the language. You said before, isn't it interesting that us Tibetans are people who come from a different background and then move to a different area and are just used to learning languages or just switching between languages. I've always found it interesting when people said, I have such a hard time switching between German and English. And I thought, is it difficult for you to switch between German and Tibetan? I always think, no, it's the easiest thing. There is no switch. It's just, I'm just talking. Is that something you feel as well?
Yeah, I do. I think, so I think, in my novel, the first book that I published, the whole thing isn't written in English, but the characters are all existing in non-English most of the time. They're speaking Tibetan to each other, they're speaking Hindi to each other, they're speaking English to each other, they're speaking Nepali to each other. So I'm translating that world into English, And I think there's something about that is like very natural to us because we have to shift not only out of different languages here and there, depending on what context we're in. If we're at home, we're talking Tibetan. If we're at school, you're talking German, whatever. But also like the different worldviews and histories that we have to hold inside of ourselves at the same time. So like, how does a German person think? How does a Canadian person think? What are their references, their histories? And, so you have to be able to like trigger those. You have to be able to like utilize those to communicate yourself, your ideas. It's just something that's essential for survival as a people, as us right now, because we are displaced and we are spread around the world. And so we have no choice. And the better you are at that, the more useful it is, especially if you're a writer. As a writer, like you're working with words and you have to be fluent with words. You have to be comfortable with words. And so really paying attention to how you're communicating, really paying attention to the spaces you're in and how people think is like essential to be effective.
Translating your emotions basically, right, into words.
Yeah.
And speaking of emotions, what did you feel when last year your book was published as the Tibetan version, right? Mm-hmm. And you met His Holiness the Dalai Lama and got to present it to him. What was that like?
It was very emotional. I mean, I didn't know if I was going to be able to, offer His Holiness the Tibetan translation. They were able to rush that and get that done in time and then we were able to have a book launch in Dharamsala. The Tibetan publisher for my book is actually the Tibetan Library, which is like a very important institution for the Tibetan community in India, but also broadly. And so they were able to do such a wonderful job translating this book. And it's much bigger in Tibetan. It's like over 650 pages in Tibetan. Because Tibetan is like such a layered language. We've got the, so it takes up more space on the page, I suppose.
Let's call it a complicated language.
Yes, complicated and still like working in the space of like very traditional language, right? Like yes. Not easily, at least written Tibetan, not easily adapted, I suppose, and no breaks between the words, which definitely makes it difficult. But yeah, so that it felt great. I was in Dharamsala and I think everything just kind of came together in a way that was really lovely, but once I was lined up and like getting ready to present my books to His Holiness, I literally lost it. I couldn't even talk. I was like crying. I couldn't really think. So it was a very emotionally powerful moment, which is great because as somebody who talks a lot, it's nice if you have nothing to say. You're just like, Let
the crying do the talking.
Yeah, let the crying do the talking. Luckily there was somebody there who kept his wits about him and he explained who I am in my book and stuff, and I just kind of sat there or like stood there blubbering. So I was grateful for that. And His Holiness is such an important figure to Tibetans as a symbol of a person who sacrificed his whole life for us. So it was just an offering to say like thank you and like I'm gonna keep writing and I just wanted to show you this and like so I was really grateful that I was able to do that.
I was just so happy when I saw that post of yours regarding you meeting His Holiness. It also made me emotional. I mean, I have to admit, I've had the privilege and honor to meet him, to see and meet him a few times. And every time, and I'm not even religious, every time I meet him, I start dwelling up. And then cry. Yeah. I mean, everybody I know does that. It's just crazy. Just a minute before, you were just like, yeah, I'm just standing in line or doing whatever. And suddenly, His Holiness comes in and you just start bawling your eyes out.
Yeah, everybody was crying. Honestly, it wasn't just me. Everybody was crying. And it was funny, there were like so many like non-Tibetans there and they were crying. And my friend and I were like, I wonder what they feel. Like, how come they're like, we know why we're crying. Why are they crying?
Stop crying, man.
Yeah.
Right. I have this idea in my head. I want to try it out with you. It's called Instagram Deep Dive. I was looking at your Instagram postings and so forth, and I had a couple of questions which I'm just going to blurt out, and maybe you can share just your reaction with me if you like.
Okay.
I saw this Chinar apple beer. What is that?
Oh, yeah, that was in Ladakh area. So I guess there's just great apples in that region. And I went to a little sort of second floor local momo place, not super touristy. And I had this apple beer and it was delicious. Highly recommend it. Honestly, it just tasted like apple juice, but it was like it had froth like beer. So it was nice.
It's like a cider, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah, I guess it's a cider, but it wasn't alcoholic. So Anyways.
Other question I had on your postings, half of your postings are about animals. What's up with that?
Are they? That's funny.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I guess so. Yeah. I love animals.
Stupid question, simple answer.
No. I love animals and, dogs, cats, cows, horses. They're all great.
I saw a photo which said no AfD. And for people who don't know, AfD is a right-wing extremist party in Germany, which unfortunately has been gaining momentum. And I saw a photo of, a sticker saying no to AfD. So does that mean you were in Germany and you didn't tell me? Although you didn't know me?
Yeah, I didn't know you. I'm sorry. Next time I will. Yeah. Yeah, no, I was in Germany last year. I was in Europe for work stuff, and I was able to go to visit Berlin for a bit and see some friends. And that photo was taken at a nightclub in Berlin. That was really great. Can't remember the name, but it was amazing.
Okay, if you don't remember where you were, that's always a good sign, right?
Yeah, it is a good sign, right? And what was great about it is it wasn't super exclusive. It was just everybody showed up, look at how they looked. And there was older people who looked like they just woke up and were in their pajamas. And it was young people who were dressed to the nines, Everybody was just dancing. I love that about the feeling of Berlin sometimes. It feels like anything goes. It's very permissive and very free. So yeah. Well, it can be. Depends on who's in power.
Yeah, exactly. I have now fingers crossed. I saw that you've been to Iceland as well. I've never been, and to me it seems like a mystic place. And I was wondering if you see any resemblance to Tibet.
Yeah, that's a great question. Iceland is one of those places, I've been there a few times because they have these free layover things where you can, if you're going to Europe anyway, you could do 5 days for free in Iceland. That's how I get to go to Iceland. And Iceland is magical, honestly. I think it's because it is so, removed from continental Europe. And that isolation has meant that a lot of its natural beauty hasn't been destroyed or exploited. And so the landscape in Iceland is profound. It's just huge sky, mountains, desert, lava, it's just it's very, very mythic in the same way that Tibet has that mythic quality of the land and the way that you can never forget where you are. The land is always very present in Iceland. It's in your face, the wind is in your face. The sun is intense, everything's there. And so I love Iceland for that reason. I think there's something about being next to a large being, whether it's a mountain or an ocean or just a vast plain, that makes me feel like I know where I am. It gives me a sense of orientation. It gives me a sense of scale, and my connection with that place feels more apparent. Whereas if I'm in a city and everybody's looking down and the sky is this narrow panel and nobody looks up anyway.
Also, in a city, it just feels like humans have made the cities, right? So you just know you are not in nature. It's something we have made for better or worse. And when I saw the postings of you, I thought, oh, that's the relationship. Humans are a part of nature and we shouldn't make nature a part of mankind. And you've been mentioning your new book, and I think it's called Run at the Rising Smoke.
I think that's what I'm going to call it. It's what it is right now. It could change. But yeah, Run at the Rising Smoke. Actually, that's comes from an old Tibetan saying that was brought up in the life of Milarepa, when Milarepa's mom asks the uncle and the aunt to return the family possessions. So Milarepa, for those who don't know, is one of the most beloved characters in the Tibetan world of storytelling. He's a saint from the 11th century, but also a poet and also a son who avenges his mother when his relatives steal their family's fortune. And he avenges his mother through black magic. And so it tells us something about the world of Tibet, 1,000 years ago, centuries ago, in which black magic was real, in which, how justice was created or not created inside of small towns. The plight of women, particularly in Milarepa's story, is very important because his mother and sister get nothing because they're women, because it's a patrilineal sort of society in terms of how possessions are passed. And so it's a very interesting story because it's about ordinary people, ordinary Tibetans on the fringes of society, and Milarepa becomes something extraordinary. He's sort of known as our first homegrown enlightened saint. You know, he never stepped foot in India. He was taught only in Tibet by Tibetan teachers and became enlightened in one lifetime. But he suffered greatly, and he's a very romantic figure in that sense. So, like for me, Milarepa has always been a presence in my life because of the storytelling aspect. There's movies, comics, so many things about Milarepa in our world. But a novel is a very interesting thing to attempt with Milarepa because his story has been a creative act for many centuries. The different people that have sort of conveyed his story in writing have done it in using the skills of craft, like saying like, I am Milarepa, using the first person to describe Milarepa's life hundreds of years after he's died. That's a craft or an artistic decision by the storyteller. So anyways, I'm now writing mostly from the perspective of women around him, but also his perspective, and I'm drawing a larger canvas too because I'm also involving the rock ogress, the demoness who gave birth to the Tibetan people. So the other main story, or like this main figure in my book, is the rock demoness. And in the Tibetan story, there's this idea that the Tibetan people were born from this rock ogress, this ogre that lived in the mountains, who made love to a monkey who was the earthly emanation of the Buddha of compassion, Avalokiteshvara. And so the two of them created the Tibetan people. And the Tibetan people have, on the one side, sort of this powerful, feminine, earthly, I guess like bodily, hard to control strength that Tibetan people have. And then this compassionate side, which is very sophisticated and very enlightened. And the Tibetan people contain both, which I love that metaphor. And I want to play with that.
Sounds very enticing to me, actually, especially the black magic part.
Good.
Obviously, I see the Netflix series coming up. Hope that's going to work out as well. But I mean, how many hours a day would you say do you write? Do you have like a schedule? I remember reading an interview with Ishiguro, and he said he writes, I think, like 4 hours a day. Every time he gets up from the table, he notes down the time of day, makes a coffee, and then comes back and then writes down what time he came back. And then when he's done the 3 or 4 hours a day, then he just stops immediately.
Yeah, I think actually 4 hours a day is pretty standard for me as well. But it's hard to get work done in less sometimes. Sometimes I can. Sometimes if I have an hour and I'm just like, I have nothing else to do, I have an hour, I'm gonna try to do something. This is a quiet place. And I can get a lot done in an hour. So I try not to be too rigid, because sometimes I don't have 4 hours. But if I have 4 hours, I find that that's a really nice stretch. And that doesn't mean I'm like typing or writing the entire time. I need to just be at my desk for 4 hours, just at least trying to do. So I'm like Ishiguro in that sense, but I don't write down when I go to the bathroom. And I can go beyond. Sometimes I'll work for 8 hours, like I'll just like lose track of time. But I find generally after 4 hours, the quality of my output goes down. Like the work suffers. And so I do generally stop around 4 hours. Yeah.
And when you start writing your actual lines, do you just write as much as you can? Or do you think, well, this doesn't sound right, I'm going to correct it immediately? Or do you think, well, screw that, I'm just going to write it down and do it later on?
Oh, yeah. No, I like to write every sentence as best I can. I know some writers who just are like, I'll just write a whatever draft, but then it creates a lot of work later for me to have to like fix it. I mean, I have to fix a lot of things later anyway, but I try to hit the sentences in a way that I enjoy. The truth is, like, if I am just writing new stuff, I'm not even thinking that much. I am just trying to be in a state of, it's almost like a meditative state. It's almost a little bit like a trance. That's why you need 4 hours, because you need that time to get into that state. So you kind of have to sit and be bored and relax and forget, and then something will come. And then once I start hearing something in my head, I just write it down. It feels like I'm just receiving it. It doesn't even feel like there's no effort in a sense. Like it feels very easy. The effort comes later when I have to read what I wrote and say, oh, now I have to make this better. How do I make this better? And then you have to get humble again, But as you're writing it, I'm not thinking that much. I'm not criticizing myself. I'm just trying to write it as naturally, as unself-consciously as I can. So the way it comes to me is the way I write it.
I think, boredom gets a bad rap, doesn't it? Boring isn't bad.
No,
boring can make you think about new things or realize certain things. I think people nowadays are really afraid of being bored. I have everything at home as well. Netflix, Amazon, Disney, whatever, So there's no danger, so to speak, of being bored. But then sometimes I feel I've done a lot and achieved nothing over the day.
I feel that. I feel that. I think that that's that. I think that's a very common kind of existential dread or feeling that we have.
I saw you went. You've been to several of these artists in residence, right? What happens there? Is that the kind of place where you allow yourself to be bored, read and just write and just do everything, or maybe nothing at all, and then just magic happens?
Well, it's funny because artist residencies are
Because they sound cool. You know, it sounds cool. I'm an artist in residence. Wow. DJ in residence.
DJ in rest. Yeah. It's not quite that cool, but I think there's a lot of time alone that you get in these places. They kind of usually give you a place to live. They give you food, so you don't have to worry about anything except for focusing on your work. And then they leave you alone for a lot of time. And even though there are other artists, you end up spending most of your hours by yourself in your studio trying to write or walking outside. So artist residencies are very important to me, especially because I have a full-time job. It allows me to have like a full break and really open my mind. And you need that mental space for a big project. So it's not just 4 hours, but now I have 12 hours, or 4 weeks. Like I'm going to spend 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. writing every day. And I could do that at an artist residency for about 2 weeks, and then I get tired. So like you can have these intense writing periods where you're able to write, thousands and thousands of words because you're in the right conditions to do so. But then you're also just a human being. So at artist residencies, there's just a lot of meeting people, becoming friends, eating, whatever. So there's all of that too.
And now, I mean, since you're writing your second book and you have this great first book now already published, how do you deal with expectations? Is that something you feel?
No, not really. It doesn't really concern me what other
Okay,
people
great.
expect.
Next question.
No, honestly, it really doesn't concern me because I think a part of it is because I have a job, and so I'm not financially dependent on my book's success, and that to me has really given me a lot of freedom and autonomy in how I conduct my writing career. I'm going to write the book I want to write. If people want it, great. If people don't, that would suck. But it's not going to change, like the outside reception or anybody's expectations will never guide my work. It's going to be inherently mysterious to me what guides my work. And it's usually based on something I'm interested in. And I have no control over that curiosity. I just have to follow it.
I dread asking the question because I remember I wrote my PhD and it took me 5 long years. And every time I met somebody, they asked me the same question, which was fair enough. They said, how are you getting along with your PhD thesis? Mm-hmm. And somehow I thought, I'm never going to finish it. But obviously I had to say, well, yeah, it's coming along nicely. It's getting better and everything. Do you work with a certain timeline? Are you saying, look, 2026 is the year of the run at the rising smoke? Is that something?
Oh wow,
we can look forward to? I put yeah. I know. We probably have to re-edit that part.
Yeah. No, that's funny. It's funny. I think that this is the thing where people don't realize quite how slowly publishing works. Like even if I had sold my book today, it wouldn't be out by 2026 just because publishing itself is a 2-year lead up, So, and I'm still writing the book. So there are a few years to go.
No pressure.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that book and it's going to be a huge success. It's been super great to talk to you and get to know you a little better. And before we wrap it up, I would like to ask you a final question, which is maybe very typical, but I think it might be helpful. What would you recommend other Tibetan authors or people who are thinking about writing something? What would you recommend them to do? How to go about it?
I mean, I think, one thing that I think is very important for our, like writing stories like ours is, to recognize that it's extremely unique, like what we have. Our story is very unique and very powerful, and a lot of people don't know it. There's a lot of potential, if you're a Tibetan person, and, of course, our story, that's meaningless too, because we contain so many experiences. What I've come out with is my version, my perspective. Like, so everybody has something that they could bring, and their experiences are so distinct and unique and captivating. I think like compelling. The Tibetan stories are compelling is what I would say. But then the distinction that I think is very important for writers or artists in general to make is something that a professor of mine taught me early on in my MFA program, which is the difference between sentiment, like meaning feelings, and sentimentality, which is where you're really trying to get an audience to respond a certain way, or like it's almost unearned. Like you push too hard on this one thing because you want people to feel sad, or you want people to feel activated or motivated, or to recognize something about us, you know? And I think that's why it's important to learn the craft, to see how others have done it. You know, you can look at writers from all over the world who have profound traumas in their communities, who have written about their societies in ways that instruct people from all over the world. Like I think of Toni Morrison, the way she writes and enters into African American, Black American trauma and strength and resilience. It's an inherently hopeful narrative, actually, what she presents, because it's about the strength ultimately, or the beauty and the depths and the richness of these characters that she's evoking in writing. And so I think about it that way too. It's like, I'm not trying to like get a reader to feel a certain way. I'm trying to get a reader to understand just how complex and beautiful and rich and powerful the people that I see around me are, like Tibetan women, just the strength and just the pragmatism mixed with compassion that I feel is very specific to certain Tibetan women that I know, I feel is very inspiring. And when I talk about these kinds of women to my non-Tibetan friends, they feel inspired. So just do it subtly, do it with care. Don't push too hard. Don't be instrumental, like where you're like, I want the reader to cry. It's like, make the reader understand, bring the reader with you. So these are all craft things. I think craft is very important.
Tsering, thank you so much again for being a part of Out of Tibet. I really feel that we had a great talk. You sharing all your thoughts and insights with me. And I wish you all the best and a lot of earned praise for your craft. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this Out of Tibet podcast. Before you leave, I want to let you know that I'm doing this podcast in my own free time, and I pay for all the equipment and software needed for recording or brushing up the audio. Therefore, it'd be great if you'd consider supporting me financially on my Patreon or PayPal, so I can continue making more free podcasts for you guys. Please check the show notes for all the details how to support this podcast financially. And if you don't happen to have any money to spare, I would love it if you'd subscribe, give this podcast 5 stars, left a positive review with Spotify, Apple, or wherever you are listening. Thank you very much in advance, and hope to see you in Tibet